The title of this webinar is Financial Markets, Panama Papers, the Media and the Monopolies. The Economist wrote that the world's most valuable resource is no longer oil but data. The giant technology companies can be seen as the new oil and mining companies. While oil and mining companies have traditionally been mining for oil and minerals, which have huge environmental costs, the technology companies are mining for data, which, amongst other costs, also has a huge privacy cost, as people give up control of their information, which again can be sold on a commercial market to third parties or other governments. The technology giants have been accused for hindering a fair competition in the market and creating monopolies through their use of legal exemption, aggressive tax planning, lobbying, and not paying the same taxes in the countries in which they operate as local companies, whereby contributing to ruining a local market. In April 2017, the Panama Papers investigation was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for explanatory reporting and for using a collaboration of more than 300 reporters on 6 continents to expose the hidden infrastructure and global scale of offshore tax havens. The Panama Papers exposed for a whole world what only one law firm had facilitated all over the world, so that political leaders, commercial corporations, doubtful organizations, and rich individuals could organize themselves through tax havens and achieve anonymity around their dispositions. It is part of a supply side in a worldwide industry. With us in this webinar to discuss these issues, we have Deputy Editor Veslemøy Østrem from the Norwegian newspaper Aftenposten, and Einar Hålien, who is editor in Schibsted, also a former journalist in the Norwegian newspaper Bergens Tidende. Let's start with a big picture here. Einar, you represent a global business and international media group with over 7,000 employees in over 20 countries in the world. From your different roles, you see that many newspapers and media houses have been hit by tax avoidance strategies by some multinational companies branching into the media industry. What does it mean for the Norwegian media industry when half of the revenues end up in internet giants using a third country?
Of course, it means that we no longer have a level playing field. Our main competitors, as it is now, is the global tech giants, Google and Facebook. As it seems right now, they will have about 70-75% of the Norwegian digital ad market this year. And when we have to pay tax in Norway, about 24%, and these competitors don't pay anything at all, close to anything at all, that's not, of course, not a fair competition. And this strikes back to our ability to make good journalism and to build and continue to do our task in society with our newsrooms and editorial newspapers. So that's a problem.
When did you first learn about how this affected your business?
It's some years ago, and you have to remember that the rise of these two giants, especially Google and Facebook, they are not the only one, but they are, of course, the biggest ones right now. This race has been quite rapid, and looking back only, let's say, 2, 3, 4 years ago, they was not that important. So let's say that I opened my eyes 4 or 5 years ago, maybe. But we have, of course, underestimated the power of these companies. So it's primarily the last 3 or 4 years that we really have gone into the issue and have started to investigate the reasons for this, try to communicate with politicians, try to cooperate with our peers in other European countries. Because this is not a Norwegian problem, it's an international problem, of course. And we now see initiatives from 18 EU countries that want to do something to adjust this situation. But as people know, tax rules internationally is extremely complicated, and the problem with this is that it will take many years to find good solutions if not someone dares to do something and try to adjust this also in a more short perspective. And that's what these EU countries try to do right now. And our message to Norwegian politicians is of course, be a bit brave. Look to the other countries' initiatives. Even though we are not the EU member, we think it's good ideas to do something here. And we think it's also possible for Norway as one country to do something. But we see that politicians, on the one hand, they would like to have this tax income, of course, but at the other hand, they are afraid of that Norway will be more interesting for big international companies, and that we will not be so attractive for investors from other countries. So it's a bit, it's a hard job to convince politicians to be brave in this issue, I think.
But talking about competition in the market, do these new tech giants really compete in the market, or do they constitute the market themselves?
That's a good question. Maybe not at least the last you were pointing at, because they are ahead of us when it comes to data mining, as you talked about. They are really good with their technical solutions. They have enormous resources to go into this and to develop new solutions for data mining, and the use of consumer data, of course, in the ad buyers' interests to reach the right audience and so on. So it's a bit of both. You have a lot of businesses in Norway that would like to advertise, of course, but and they will use their money to reach their specific audience. And when Google and Facebook comes up with solutions that makes it easier for them to reach exactly the audience they want to reach, then of course they are eager to try that. So this don't mean that we have given up. We are investing a lot to compete and to find good solutions in safe environments, and that's also a point here, because if you go into these giant networks with your ad, it might end up some places where you don't want to be exposed. And we try to offer a safe environment with strong brands that people know and respect, and we think that's our advantage in this competition.
The corporation Schibsted, you own finn.no. It's a Norwegian platform, perhaps the largest one for buy and sell everything from property to small items. Finn had a taxable profit in 2017 on 580 million Norwegian kroner, which gives the Norwegian community 140 million in tax, for which we can use for a common good. But in comparison, one of its main competitors, Facebook, is estimated to be earning around 2.3 billions in Norway this year. Still, the company pays almost no tax. Can you describe this competition situation?
I think is quite obvious. This is of course not fair, and it makes it possible for Facebook, for example, to use a whole lot more money in developing because they don't have to pay tax, so they can. They are already far ahead of us, at least some place ahead of us, and they can speed up even more when they have so little tax to pay. But I think it's also important to say that we don't believe that Facebook and Google will stop acting in the Norwegian market, even though they have to pay a tax at the same level as us. They will still be an important competitor for us in the Norwegian market, and in Sweden and in other countries as well. But we think it will at least make it, they will contribute to society, and it might also be easier for the Norwegian government to see if they can do something about the regulations for Norwegian newspapers and maybe journalistic startups. If you're going to do something new in Norway in journalism, that's quite expensive. We are a small market. Maybe the state could contribute a bit more to make things like this succeed. And if they have some income from Google and Facebook, then that could be a good argument to spend some of that money into new areas of journalism in Norway. So that's how we see this, both from a purely fair competition side, and as a more of an economic point of view in the political debate of how to support Norwegian journalism.
But where does this competition situation leave Schibsted today? You can be a good company, you can pay the tax that you should and contribute to community, or you could actually choose to engage in the same type of schemes that Facebook does and move your business to Ireland, which is also to contribute to a race to the bottom for society at large.
And that's maybe the most important part of this discussion, because of course we struggle with the competition and so on, but where will this lead when more and more of the global economy becomes digital and we don't have tax rules that are really built for digital businesses? What will happen if companies like us move Finn to Ireland, for example? What will happen if other big digital players in the Norwegian market and other markets move to their business to tax havens? That's the race to the bottom, and that's both a huge economical problem to finance this welfare state that we live in, and it's of course also, and that's not at least important, it's a huge democratic problem that is underestimated, I think, in the public debate.
How many years do you have to wait for the Norwegian government to do something before the situation kicks in?
That's really hard to answer. If the development will go forward the way it has been the last 2 or 3 years, we don't have much time at all. But I tend to be a little bit more optimistic than that. I think that the consequences of this regime, and again, it's important to say that this is not a Norwegian problem, it's of course an international problem. I think the consequences of this are sending a kind of a wake-up call into the political environment right now. The French Prime Minister spoke about this in Davos, in the World Economic Forum, some weeks ago, and he showed that he really understands the problem with this development, and I think it's an awakening going on, but something has to be done quite quick. Let's see, not more than 2 years from now, I think. It's really important.
Not to contribute to be more pessimistic, but these platforms, they do also benefit from so-called network effect, meaning that the more people it attract, the stronger it becomes. And investors seem to be expecting that these giants are going to double or triple in size pretty soon and within the next decade. What effect might this have on the media industry at large?
It's different trends that are working in the same time right now. One of the trends is about how to find good solutions for advertisers to help us finance journalism. People's habits towards media consumption is of course shifting. Of course, young people are digital media users, of course, and we have to be less paper dependent than we are today. That's a really big problem for us, and I can't blame Google because we are paper dependent. That's our own problem. But the point here is that it's several different trends that has a huge impact of our ability to produce quality journalism. And if we are not able to correct some of these trends, both inside in our company to develop more rapid than we are used to do, and also in the political environment and among that tax rules and so on, then we will have a really big problem. I am really concerned that we will not have really important Norwegian journalism in only 5 years or something like that if this development goes on. And that's a really critical situation, not so much for Schibsted because we have other things that we can expand and invest in, but for society this is a really critical situation. And already today we see that we have a whole lot of what we can call the blind spots in society, areas that do not have any journalistic cover, and that's all both in the geographical dimension with small communities that never see a journalist, and also big communities. Take Oslo, the biggest what we call city or community in Norway, with very little journalistic coverage. That's critical. That's critical for the people's ability to be informed and to engage, to debate, and it's critical for the trust between people and political systems. So that was answer in different directions, but I think it's several trends working in the same direction. It's not so easy to isolate the consequence of the tax rules for Facebook and Google's from the other trends that are working in. I can't say that it's Google that are going to kill Norwegian journalism. That's too simple. But they will contribute in a way, or society will contribute because we don't have tax rules that makes competition fair.
But it seems that in everyday, we talked about habits, actors like Google and Facebook, they seem to be all over and they seem to be almost necessary. And also for businesses and business ability to reach out. Can your company do without Google and Facebook?
This is a really important discussion that has been going on among media companies for some years now. How are we going to cooperate with Google and Facebook? And where do we draw the lines between them and us? And some media companies have gone all in with Facebook and Google's and sort of made them their publishing platforms. And in short term, that might have been a good idea because they are so sophisticated with their algorithms and their tech solutions. But the problem is, of course, that you give your whole business to one of your competitors. And when Facebook says that we want to change the algorithms a bit so that you can see more of your friends and less of news content on Facebook. Well, what will happen then with the media houses that are dependent on the distribution from Facebook? We also have some of our traffic and our visitors coming in from Facebook, but not so much that it will kill us if we stop that traffic tomorrow. So we have tried to build something aside these systems, but of course we also use Facebook to make especially young people aware of our journalism and try to engage them in our environment.
Another important issue arising with monopolistic behavior in general, but particularly with the tech companies, it's their ability to gather information on its users. The products are free, but users pay by giving away personal data, often not knowing how it's going to be used now or in the future. For example, Facebook now holds the world's biggest pool of personal data, and research recently found that Facebook is able to hold identifiable data of over 40% of the EU population. So when we talk about giving away data or businesses to a competitor, it's also an aspect of giving away data or business perhaps to state. Because what happens when you combine big data with big brother governments? China is now rolling out its social credit system, which purpose is to scrutinize, evaluate, and to rank individual citizens' trustworthiness towards its governments. So 1.3 billion citizens will be ranked, and the score will determine future possibilities of perhaps you, your friends, your family. Is this aspect of the behavior also being discussed in Schibsted or in the industry?
Absolutely, and we some years ago hired privacy experts to take care of our use of user data and to make sure that we operate within the frames of both legal and moral limits. But right now it's of course the EU's GDPR implementation that will be operative from May, I think. That's the most important thing going on right now, and that's something that also the really global tech giants have to follow. So I think that's a step in the right direction from the EU side and to Norway through our agreement with the EU. But of course, it's potentially dangerous when you store a whole lot of personal data if unfriendly governments or other actors in society use this data in a negative way. But that's the reason also that it's quite strong rules to regulate how long you can store data. You can't store data for more than it's absolutely necessary, and then you have to erase it. How the situation in China is, I don't really know, but at least inside the EU, I think we see a more healthy development now with a lot of engagement to protect the citizens' personal data. But this don't mean that every problem is solved, but at least I think it will make it more transparent for people. What data do you have about me Do I have the possibility to say no to you harvesting data about me? For how long will you store this data, and so on? So I think this the GDPR implementation going on right now will change this situation a whole lot, really.
Veslemøy Østrem, you had, with a small team of journalists in Norway, in the Norwegian newspaper Aftenposten, but with a large team internationally, you also got access to data. So while this company has a lot of our data, some data came through big leakage in the Panama Papers. And you've been producing journalism which has been exposing the operations of big corporations, rich individuals, and your paper was perhaps the leading newspaper to deliver stories on Panama Papers day after day after day for a long, long time. Can you explain to me what happened when you walked into your newsroom one morning and you got involved with the Panama Papers?
Well, I had been the leader of the economy department in Aftenposten for just some weeks when one of our very experienced investigative journalists, Per Anders Johansen, came to me. And he was into the collaboration with ICAIJ, which was collaborating on Panama Papers. And he just came to me and said, okay, I think the next leak is for you. So that was the first connection to that. I had been leading the work with the later leak, that was LuxLeaks. So my newspaper also had been working on LuxLeaks and SwissLeaks. So the field was not unknown for our journalists, but it was rather unknown for me. What I was thinking was, in fact, since the last leaks was not that much work, I wasn't thinking that, wow, my next year will be totally different from all the other years I've been working as a journalist. But I thought, okay, we have to put on a team on this. So I was thinking, looking out into my department, and thought, okay, let's do some crazy moves here. Let's put one of the most experienced economy reporters together with one of the youngest and most eager data journalists. And she was not very into this field in the beginning. And together with the researcher, we made a team of 3 persons working half a year on this matter before we staffed up with more journalists.
I suppose it developed up a little bit, your team, during this year. How many people did you end up being in your team?
When we started the publishing on the 3rd of April, in the evening, we were 30 journalists and researchers and also web developers in the team. And of course we had good contact with the rest of the world, so my team was in fact very large. Yes, and we also we helped other teams in the rest of the world.
Did you understand, or your team understand, what kind of data you had before you?
No. I will not say that we understood what impact Panama Papers would have and how large it was. We understand that it was a very huge leak. It was 11.5 million documents. And we started out with a seminar with 300 journalists in München, where a smaller team had been investigating a little bit in front, and we got the main stories rather quick. So we knew about the Iceland president, we knew about the Putin stories, we knew about some of the large international stories already in September 2015, isn't it? Yeah.
How did you build up your own competence in the team along the way on something which is quite complex?
That was one of my main issues to focus on, because I knew that this was really complex, and we had to do it right from the first time. So I asked my journalists to use a lot of time with reading, talking to experts, but we couldn't say what we were working about. So we couldn't have more than sort of brief contact with experts before it was 1 month before the publications. But we had to build up a dictionary. We had to learn what the system was built up, how Mossack Fonseca, the lawyer firm in Panama, how they worked, and how this chain of secrecy, which I call it, was built up from the person who wants to hide money or use shell companies, and to all the process from what role does this have, what is the shell company, how do they use them in different types of companies.
But how did you choose which story to run in Norway first out of all of these data?
What we started to do was 4 months with investigative journalists just digging into the material. Our journalists built up a database with persons. Of course, we could find the Norwegians first. We were, of course, most interested in them. And we built up our own database with all the names, and used all the documents that was already there for us, like Brønnøysundregisteret and newspapers and all other open sources, to just find out who are the people, what are they doing, and what is the documents telling. And then we had maybe 200 stories we could focus on. So we had to do a big prioritization. And in January we had a meeting where we just went through all the names and found out what is the main stories. So we chose 4 main stories, and that was the DNB story, Yara, the company which was involved in 4, not 3 corruption scandals, and also one of the shipping families in Norway, which was a very big client of Mossack Fonseca. And we also worked on the international story of Iceland, which was the main story. So we chose those, and then we forgot all the others for some time.
Did you feel that your readers were on board from the first stories, or was it something that developed slowly as more stories were coming?
From the other leaks, we knew that this was a rather hard stories to get engagement from the audience, because it's complicated and it's nothing that we do in our ordinary lives. So I think we were a little bit afraid of that we should have 3 weeks of publications and nobody cares. I think the first time I really realized that this was another thing was the Sunday morning when we released a little teaser on our social media. It was like 20 seconds of what is coming this night. And I think 100,000-200,000 persons just saw this teaser, and they starting buzzing about what is happening. Wow. And also when the DNB communication manager called me and said, okay, now is everybody else calling me, so I have to tell them something. Then we understand that this was not going to be only Aftenposten that was going to publish and publish and publish. We were going to have competition and a lot of audience. And that was nice. That was a nice feeling.
But was it possible to sustain your readers' attention over a long time, over a long period? Because there were many more stories unfolding, and you were talking about the chain of secrecy, which is quite complex. It's demanding to follow.
The first 3 weeks we had a publication plan together with the international media. So we had to choose between all the stories also in the international field. But it was quite good stories, in fact. It was dramas in the parliament in Iceland, which is very close to Norway. And it was a lot of attention from politicians. I remember Obama talked about this just some hours after our publication, and he said the problem with this matter is not that it's illegal. The problem is that it's legal. So then we started to have an international debate, and but what we did was to focus on explanation and giving insight, and also to all the time summarize up what happened this week. So we have to try to give our readers a possibility to follow, even if they hadn't been reading all the stories.
So you're explaining. Can you explain a little bit more in how do you present a complex, in-depth investigative stories? Which tools and strategies did you use? Can you say something more about it?
We worked together with news developers from the beginning, and the best thing with them is that they have all the possibilities to make good digital presentations. So we worked together with them closely, so we could really strap it down and tell the main stories and explain what is the system. What is this story? What is the Yara story? What is the DNB system? So we used a lot of 1-minute explanations in video, and using a lot of visual elements. You know, it was 11 million documents, so we could find a lot of visual explanation, and using the documents, lining up, underlining, telling what is this document really showing. So I think we were rather good in helping the audience to understand this field.
You also mentioned that as your stories were unfolding, it became broader, and you can see many other papers starting writing about it. Is that just a response, or is it also a collaboration? Can you explain something more how it works internationally as opposed to how it works nationally?
The international collaboration were built up in teams. So we had a newsroom, a digital secure newsroom all the time. So we can go into folders, and it was called radical sharing. Everybody should share everything. And in these teams there were discussions going on all the time. But when we started publishing in Norway, of course we will not collaborate with our competitors in Norway. They had to, I'm sorry to say, they didn't have the documents, so they couldn't find the same stories as we did. But of course they started to use their own sources and build up the stories, especially around the DNB story in Norway, the bank, the private /public bank. So there we got a lot of competition, of course, and that was good for our work, because it sharpened us a bit.
Can you say something more about how you use digital communication to build up cross-border networks of collaboration? How did you?
That was not my responsibility. I'm very glad for that, but of course the security is the main issue here. So it was a very tough security system around this. I can't say so much about that because it's secret, but we had a lot of focus on that. Both the security to secure the data and also the security of the persons. So we did a lot of security checks on our journalists and also our main collaborative journalists in other countries.
So what is important to think about when you lead a team of journalists in an investigation like this?
I think the most important thing was that we had to understand what we were doing, what we were finding. So we had to, as I said, build up our own competence. The security issues was really important. We had to be isolated from the rest of the newsroom for a long time, and we couldn't talk even at home what we were doing. One of my reporters, she had a dream one night, and she wake up just like, wow, I think I said a name to my fiancé. So it was hard to bear all this information. So what I was telling them was to use the international network to talk and to get help. Also, when you were tired and you didn't know where to go, we could go into this network, and that was a very good strength for us. And I also know, for example, from our colleague in Iceland, he was all alone on his work with this huge story, and he used us a lot to just have some contact with other people that knew what he was working on. So that was more of a human working with supporting my people. Mm.
Do you know anything more 1 year or
2 years?
2 years after, how did this shape your readers, or did it shape your readers in any way?
Yes, I think the Panama Papers has been something that a lot of Norwegians know something about, and that the tax discussions are more into person's life now, and of course in the politician system there has been a lot of work. Also in the tax regulators in Norway they are talking about before and after Panama Papers, and they have said to me that they have learned a lot about how we collaborated across the borders. But what I have learned, it's a lot of work to investigate. You're going to get to be tired afterwards. You have to rest, but it's very inspiring to work with these fields, and it's also very clear to me that our system was built in the 50s. It's not built for the new situation when the international economy is so cross-border. This system was built for the shipping industry, and I think it's not the best system. It's a lot of things that has to be done in that system.
Also, in this chain of documents, emails, invoices, there are also victims, but it's not so hard to perhaps see them. Did you manage to write stories about the consequences for society, and how could you do that?
Yes, we had, after some months where the focus was really national in Norway, we started to work together with the international team with the African continent, because I think in 2013 there was over 1,000 billions of dollars that was flowing from developing countries through the shell companies. And of course that is the continent that is really suffering from this system. We are talking about the media companies. Of course we are having a bad time, but that is the main reason why this is so important to work with, because the poorest people are also the one that are lacking most in this system. So that was a main story then, and I think our motivation to go into this field is telling something about, of course, Norwegian power persons, Norwegian companies, but also the big picture of a system that has to be done something with.
You have also mentioned the chain of secrecy, and it presents a whole lot of problems for journalists, both as a media industry, but also to access information. How is it possible to write about these things without the leakages, to expose the mechanisms behind all this, the driving forces? What reflections did you make after Panama Papers?
Some have told me that it's easy for us because we had this leakage, and I say maybe 70% of what we was writing about was not from the leak, it was from open sources. It was working with sources, it was working with documents that is open. So what I say is that you can work on these matters without a leak. But of course the leak was our chain to this chain of secrecy. It was the key to lock it up. and what we got was stories that was hidden because of a reason for a lot of persons. That I have to say, some persons are using, of course, this system in quite legal, in totally legal ways. But the problem is the secrecy. Was that an answer?
Yes.
Sort of.
And as we talked a little bit about that, also media's greatest competitors these days are creatures who do not necessarily produce any editorial content themselves, yet they have the power to undermine traditional journalism. And Einar said that perhaps even investigative journalism will not be anymore in 5 years. How do you see the mechanisms between the rise of these corporations and the facilitation of what you found out through Panama Papers?
One of the main things that I learned is that the collaboration is so important, and I think we should collaborate more also in Norway with our competitors in Norway. Because we are smaller newsrooms, the amount of journalists are not that high as it was. The companies that we are trying to investigate in, they have a huge information departments that are much bigger than our economy section in Aftenposten. So we have to be clever to help each other and not so afraid of sharing information. And I'm optimistic about the investigative journalism because I see that our users, they would like to pay for this content. That is a good thing to see. The last 2 years we have seen that it's not. This is important for our readers. They support us by their subscriptions. So I think we have to prioritize a lot of small stories away, and of course the problem is that we will not build up a network source, a source of good. Our source work is difficult to do when you don't do the small stories in between all the great stories. So we have to be smart in how we use our reporters now.
Could I ask you, after all of this, what stories are you interested in writing now?
I think in Norway we have a very interesting way to organize the governmental owned companies. And they are big actors in the international economy, and we have to follow them really closely because they are in this system, and I'm not sure if we have access to the information we should have because they are so closely bounded to the government. So that is a good story I would like to investigate more in.
I would like to open for questions from some of the students, if you have any.
Yes, I would like to follow up one of Mona's question to you, Veslemøy, like how the Panama Papers and the work on the leakage has, what it has done to the newspaper Aftenposten and maybe the media in Norway. The team that you had working on this, have this team continued to work on this? Have it like increased, or have you more people working on this? Because to do it, like, you need preparation, as you said, like some of the people in the team were not prepared for this, and like through the work of this you learn a lot and you will have a lot of experience. How have you shared this with the other journalists? And of course Panama Papers is famous project. It's a lot of prestige in Panama Papers, and there is a lot of stories, as you said, that you can have access to through open sources. which concerns corruption, companies, everything. And do you feel like responsibility to lead this work in the Norwegian media? Like we see this Saturday, Klassekampen was publishing other leakages concerning surveillance through the Norwegian army, and how would you approach similar subjects without it being the big Panama Papers or Paradise Papers or this more famous project? If it was understandable, this.
Yes, of course. What I can say about that is last autumn we also worked with Paradise Papers. That was another team, not led by me. But what we were thinking when we set up that team was that we had to use some of the persons from the Panama team, but we have to give the competence to a broader amount of journalists. So we changed a little bit so that even more persons should be working on that field. And that was quite, we were using almost the same methods, I think, in that work, prioritizing data journalism, the storytelling and the explanations stories. And of course, we are feeling a bit responsible of following up on these questions. And I think also the technology journalists are working closely with the matter of the tech giants, the system around them, I think. But of course, in the everyday journalism, we are coping with so many other stories. So it has to be always a prioritizing problem. Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you for the talk. I have two questions for Einar and one for Veslemøy. First, Einar, about Facebook. Do you have any contact with them here in Norway, or have had any contact with them the last years? And do you consider them a platform or a publisher? And then, Veslemøy, did Panama Papers and Paradise Papers made you come in touch with sources in Norway, and are you working, do you have a relationship with these sources still and working with them on cases?
Shall we start with the question about Facebook? We have some contact with them. I personally have not had so much contact. I met them in London a couple of years ago, discussing instant articles. But our editors, I know, have some contact now and then, but we don't feel that they are very transparent and open-minded. In a way, Google is much more forward-leaning with initiatives to cooperate and to develop things together and so on. The question, platform or publisher, is really interesting and important. And in a way, I think it's important to see them as both. And that was what Facebook tried to avoid for a long time. They insisted that we are only a platform. We are not responsible in a way for the content in our environment and so on. But at some point, I think Mark Zuckerberg and his leaders had to realize that we have to take responsibility, at least to some level, because it's possible to use this platform in a way that will harm society in ways we have never seen before. We have all the discussion about fake news, for example, during the American election, and we had other examples of how hatred and other things are spread in Facebook. And also personal attacks. And in a way, Facebook has been forced to take a position and do something about this. And I think the implication of this is that everyone has to understand that they has to be seen as a responsible publisher and not only a platform.
To me, yes, of course, we had a lot of contact with Norwegian sources, and we are working on several stories. What we have now is a very good database of 4 different leaks. And how we use that database is that we can, when stories comes up, we can go into our database and check if that is something which the documents can give more information about. And of course that is a very good resource to have in our other stories. So I think we are using the database weekly, I think. And we would like to collaborate also with other, but that is a question of resources.
If you have the time, I would like to say some words about, I think it's a very interesting paradox in Norwegian journalism these days. Because let's look to our newsrooms. We have reduced our newsrooms with about 50% the last 10 years, and that's really a lot. And the same situation do we have in most Norwegian news organizations. But if you ask, for example, the jury of the Scoop nominations, the most prestigious award for investigative journalism, they will tell us that we have never had more good nominees, nominated cases, and more than ever before. So what is this telling us? I think the positive story is that we use journalistic resources on the really most important issues, but at the same time we lose a whole lot of the day-to-day critical journalism, who is important for every man and woman in this country to understand what is going on. And these blind spots are what is really concerning me. I'm not so afraid that we will lose the ability to do the big and heavy investigative projects. And the day-to-day hard work, when journalists goes into the bureaucracy or into companies asking troubling questions, digging, come up with a story that concerns people from day to day, that's the part of journalism I am afraid we're going to lose. And that's quite a difficult situation, I think.
Question for Einar. We spoke before the session about 1995 being the big year of mistake when everyone on the media sites opened their internet sites for free use, and now we're going the opposite way. At the same time, we do media houses who feel that the advertising is being stolen by Facebook. They make themselves dependent on Facebook as a platform to distribute their news. How a good plan for the future is this? And should there be another opportunity rather quickly?
First of all, I would say I really don't want to be seen as a guy that are complaining about the competition and think that Facebook has stolen something from us. They have been really good and clever. They have done amazing things. So I'm not whining about that. But the question you are raising is something I think I spoke a bit about earlier, and that is how do you relate to Facebook in a way that gives you a good way of communicating with your audience and make it possible to recruit not at least young readers to, for example, Aftenposten or Bergens Tidende or whatever, but not make yourself dependent on the Facebook way of running business. And I don't have the exact right answer to that, and I also see that different media companies have chosen different strategies. But I'm a bit afraid that too many media companies have been too dependent on Facebook. They have, in a way, used Facebook as their main distributor of journalism, and if Facebook chooses to change their algorithms or their business model, then we're in big trouble. We had a little bit of this story some years ago in Spain, and that was more in the in our marketplace business and not in the media house business, but there was a change from, I think this is a bit blurry, but I think it was a change during night when we had the kind of a 70-30 what do you call it, share of income. Then overnight Google said we want it the other way around, 70-30. And it was nothing we could do about that. They had all the power, and we had to accept it. So that shows that it was just a little example, but it shows us how dependent we are when we are dealing with these giants, and that, I think, is a dangerous situation. So you asked, what can we do about that? How can we? And of course, we are not good enough to cooperate within the other parts of the media industry, because we have this legacy where we're competitors, and it's going far too slow to establish new alternative solutions. That's a problem.
Okay. Was there a last question?
Yeah, I'm wondering, during the work on Panama Papers, why you chose not to collaborate with other newsrooms, other medias in Norway, and do you think the coverage would benefit from doing so, and what have you done to collaborate with other media after?
All the medias that should collaborate on these stories had to be accepted from ICIJ. So to have access to the documents, you had to be a part of that collaboration. And no other medias in Norway was in that collaboration at that time. We would like to invite local medias and regional medias to come and sit together with us if they had something they would like to examine in the documents, but we didn't have time, in fact, to do that. I think it would be some stories that would be better if we could collaborate with other medias. Of course it would be. And now I think it would be very interesting if some other could take contact and really try to find out if we could use this in another way. But to have access to the real documents is only for the ICIJ collaborative medias. On the other side, of course, the surface of the documents, the names and the owners of the companies are published in ICIJ database, so you can search. So all the other medias can search in the basis, but they cannot find out what is under the surface. So yes and no, if that was an answer.
So when companies does not pay tax, little or no tax, and keep everything to themselves, they of course become rich, which again makes it possible to buy up also possible future competitors. But the companies are also so big, they are looking into a whole other chain of the value chain. Which sectors do you think might be the next for the tech giants?
I think that it's some sectors that are quite obvious that will be hit by this kind of actors. And one of them is, of course, bank, finance, and then telecom, because they have technological dependencies and technology that fits quite good into some parts of what actors as Google and Facebook already have built, so that they can add on some functions and some instruments in their already existing technology to build something that will attack new big areas of business and society. But of course it could also be other sectors. Maybe it's a whole lot of industries and businesses that are very tech dependent. So it could be in defense systems, for example. It's not unlikely that a company like Google, with about 50,000 tech developers, can use some of the resources to find out how can we do something to earn money in sectors like that. So it's a whole lot of opportunities for them, and they have a kind of resource base and flexibility in their development that makes it possible for them to move quick. Today we think of Google as some kind of little bit childish company with these nice letters, and nice way to find information to search. But they are so much more. They are a huge tech company that could move in many different directions. And that's what is important to understand about companies like this.
What challenges does this pose to democracy as we know it, this concentration of power?
It's not necessarily a direct link between the opportunities that Google will look into and the competition challenges that will meet traditional businesses and democracy. But of course, when you see a concentration of economy and power in quite a few really big global companies with little democratic insight, with very little transparency, that's a democratic problem. It's an economic problem for societies, ref the tax discussion, but it's also a big democratic problem, because we don't know what they are doing, how they will influence society, what direction they will go in, how they can influence the way we are thinking and acting and moving on as societies. So that, in a way, we move power in society from the public, the great public, to the private locked rooms. And that's a problem in a democratical sense.